Hello, welcome to the Distractables, a podcast for ADHDers by ADHDers, focusing on ADHD tips, tricks, and hacks to get through daily life. I'm your co-host, Marie. I'm also the founder of Llama Life, which is an app to help ADHDers get through daily life with tasks and routines. And I'm here with my friend, Jessie J. Anderson.
Hey, I'm Jesse. I'm the author of the book Extra Focus, the Quick Start Guide to Adult ADHD, as well as the weekly ADHD newsletter called Extra Focus. And today we're really excited. We've got Ari here.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
So Ari Scott, a lot of you might already know her as the ADHD Entrepreneur. Ari, I think your introduction that I've got here is probably the best one I've ever seen. It says, late in life diagnosed ADHD, expelled from school, fired, empty bank account, unemployment, burnout, failure. You've been through it all. Fast forward many years, you've actually built a business to $250,000 under 2 years by aligning your interests with your ADHD brain. And you believe that entrepreneurship is a lifetime for ADHDers. And I think that's just so cool because I'm an entrepreneur myself, and so is Jessie. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. But I think our main topic, in addition to that, is also something that is really fascinating to me. It's RSD and relationships. So RSD is Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria. It's something that I didn't really know about until much later. But it's essentially when you experience severe emotional pain because of failure, because you feel like you might be rejected by something. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, Ari, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. And my favorite part about that introduction was how you said, I think this might be the best introduction ever, and then just listed off a list of really bad things that I've done. This is the best introduction ever. Expelled, fired. I was like, yeah, it doesn't sound great at the beginning, actually, does it?
Yeah. No, it sounds good to me. I think there's so many of us have been through something similar to this, so it's very relatable to me.
Yeah, extremely relatable for sure. You were going through the list and I was like, oh yeah, that sounds familiar. That sounds familiar. That one close to that, not quite, but right in there. Yep.
Yeah, I do feel like it's quite a commonplace backstory, really, if you're an ADHD brain, right?
Yeah. And you were late diagnosed, did you say?
Yeah, late-ish. So I guess that's context because for some people, especially of recent times, a lot of women who aren't diagnosed until they're like 40s and 50s and above. I was diagnosed at 26, 27, can't really remember which one, later in life, but also still quite grateful to have been diagnosed when I was. I still, such a terrible thing to say, but see myself as one of the lucky ones, for lack of a better word, even though it was later in life in that way.
Mm-hmm. How do you see it as lucky?
It's quite literally that it could have been worse. Does that make sense? And my diagnosis story is a little bit bizarre in the fact that I was actually tested for ADHD when I was 10 years old. So I was not that case of a female diagnosis in which it was inattentive and that's why it was missed. Like, I am pretty classic combined ADHD. Like, I was the textbook ADHD kid at school. You can see it from my school reports. Some of them are quite offensive, I'm going to be honest. A bit rude, but what can you do? And so I was tested for ADHD at 10, and the psychologist told my mum that I was too intelligent to have it because at the time there was all that misinformation around it and that kind of, just misunderstanding. And so I would have probably got diagnosed sooner if I hadn't have got misdiagnosed then, because I've been just so clearly ADHD my entire existence. But anytime anyone's been like, do you think that you might have ADHD? I was like, no, because I was tested for it and I don't have it when I was a kid. So there is that on the one hand, but on the other hand, it really is just a case of at least I was diagnosed in my late 20s rather than later on, because my heart goes out to anybody who is navigating life with undiagnosed ADHD and no idea why, because you're just fighting an invisible obstacle. And the longer that goes on, the more consequences and struggle that you face, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like all the things we listed, that expelled and all the failure and all that sort of stuff. When you don't know that there's ADHD going on behind the scenes, then it just feels, what the heck is wrong with me? Why am I trying so hard and yet everything seems to keep failing? I keep falling short for some reason, and without knowing about ADHD, I was, what the heck's wrong? Why can't I seem to achieve these things? It doesn't make any sense. I was in my mid-30s when I got diagnosed. It was just this huge light bulb moment of, now all of this history of mine makes sense. There's this whole other thing going on that was like, not that it's the excuse or whatever, but it's the reasons. Now I know why, because I always knew something was going on and I just didn't know what it was. I didn't have a label or a way to explain it or really even understand it. I just knew that my actions aren't lining up with what I want them to, and it seems other people aren't struggling in the same way that I'm struggling. And so ADHD really helped provide the context for understanding why I was getting fired and all the things that kind of happened growing up, and especially struggling in the 20s. There's the school struggles, and then you get out of school, and then it's like a whole different world of struggles that continue.
Oh, yeah.
Struggles 2.0.
Yes. Yeah.
So relatable. So I got diagnosed in my early 30s, and very sort of similar thing where I was very conflicted when I got diagnosed. Like, I was very excited that I had the explanation, but then I was also very, oh my gosh, what do I do? Because, okay, well, what now? I know this, that's great. And everything makes sense now. Everything just lined up. And I'm like, of course, this is why I am the way I am. And this is why I'm struggling, and seem to be putting in so much more effort than everybody else to get the most basic things done. But then I excelled in some really hard things, and I'm like, I don't get this. Why can I do all these hard things? And I like doing these things that are challenging and interesting, but I can't even do my timesheets at work. I can't do my laundry. I can't wash the dishes. I can't do these basic things. But very similar thing, where relief from the diagnosis, but also, okay, what now? And I think bringing it to the topic of RSD, one of the things that I discovered as part of the diagnosis, actually it was after the diagnosis, maybe a year after, was RSD. And I had no idea that there was like some kind of correlation between people with ADHD and experiencing RSD. So you can experience RSD without ADHD, but it was just something that I was like, I had no idea. This thing impacts me so much. And I always felt like I felt very deeply about things, but I didn't realize it was a thing.
Yeah, totally. I have a bit of a curveball opinion on RSD, and
okay.
I'm always quite reserved about sharing it too much, because when I say it, it doesn't always sound great. But I actually don't particularly like the term RSD, and that's not because I don't believe in it, because of course I do. But the reason that I don't like it is because I think that RSD obviously is a heightened sensitivity to rejection and criticism, which comes along with emotional dysregulation. As ADHDers, obviously, we feel things more intensely than people who don't have ADHD, right? And I think my challenge with RSD is I think sometimes that term takes away from the vast emotional spectrum of all the other things that dysregulate. Does that make sense? So obviously I completely agree that we are far more sensitive to rejection and criticism.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that sometimes what gets missed in that conversation as a result is the conversations around all the other negative emotions. So, anger, frustration, stress, right?
Sure,
obviously burnout, but then also the positive side of emotional dysregulation, which is excitement and happiness and joy and the positive emotions that also get dysregulated but have a positive impact. So I think that RSD is a really helpful term because I think it gives a lot of peace to people and gives a lot of understanding. I also just am wary of the fact that it takes away occasionally from the bigger picture of the whole impact of emotional dysregulation. So I'd love to hear what you guys think about that.
So you're saying that it's almost like there's sensitivity to all emotions in a way, and RSD, by singling out the rejection part, is overshadowing that, because there are other positive things too. Like when I get excited about something that I'm making, like it's an intense excitement. All emotions are intense in some way. Yeah, I think I agree with that. I do think it's the whole spectrum of emotions. I don't know. What do you think, Jessie?
Yeah, so I think that's interesting. The term rejection sensitive dysphoria that we're calling RSD, it was just invented by Dr. William Dodson, and it's not documented as like a real thing.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
that doesn't
so
mean
you
it's not
like
a real thing. But yeah, go on.
exactly.
Mhm.
It's not a documented thing though. Like it doesn't exist in the DSM-5, which is the does it Australia use that too? I think Australia might also use that. They use that in the US
Yeah,
for
yeah.
diagnosing. Anyway, so it's not a real quote unquote thing as far as that name, other than Dr. William Dodson came up with that name. And then a lot of ADHDers were like, yes, me too. That sounds really familiar. Whereas rejection sensitivity is a thing. And that is actually when you say that other people without ADHD can have RSD, that's actually slightly different. That would be just rejection sensitivity. And so Dr. William Dodson, his naming of RSD is specifically to call out as separate from standard rejection sensitivity because it's even more intense. And a lot of that having to do with, I can't remember who it was, but somebody estimated that kids growing up with ADHD hear 10,000 more negative remarks than their peers by the age of like 10 or 12 or something like that.
20,000.
Which sounds, what's that?
It's 20,000.
Yeah, you're right. 20,000.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's like
Strabo was bad. Oh no.
And I think that is what, to me, I think that's partly why I do think RSD is worth being called out, even though it's not whatever a thing or not, is that it's even more intense than the normal emotional dysregulation, which is a big deal as well. And so for me, when I first heard about it, same with you, Marie, like when I first heard about it, it was a couple of years, I think, after I had gotten diagnosed with my ADHD. And then I heard about this and I was like, what? That's related with the ADHD too, this whole other thing that's been a lifelong struggle, which for me, I always just chalked it up as anger problem or anger management, that even though when I tried anger management stuff when I was younger, is like none of that helped at all. And now I knew why, is because it was totally treating the wrong sort of thing. So for me, I think I totally see what you're saying, Ari, because it's like, you don't want to throw out this really other huge important thing, the emotional dysregulation, because it's not just about the rejection. But because of that, the 20,000 negative messages or whatever it is, that I think specifically hits this core feeling of rejection and feeling not enough and feeling like
That's like amplification.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like more amplified, specifically this sort of core area of the emotional dysregulation, where it, as Dodson describes it, it often feels like physical pain. And that's how I feel when I'm in one of those episodes of feeling RSD. It feels like the deepest betrayal is happening. And there's like this tightness inside my chest that's really hard to describe. But yeah, so I think there's definitely a validity to both. For one, I do think emotional dysregulation in general probably isn't talked about a lot. Well, and probably could be for sure.
I'm totally interrupting you. Classic ADHD.
No, you're fine.
My apology. It's funny you say about the measure of rejection, whatever we're going to call it, not being in the DSM-5, because, and that's connected to the point I was making. My concern is that emotional dysregulation also isn't included in the DSM-5, right? I use the term RSD in my own content because it's understood on a social perspective. And I totally agree with it. And I totally agree with what you said. I think that in that spectrum of emotion, that rejection is definitely the one that cuts the deepest.
Yeah. And I think for me, thinking about those 20,000 sort of messages that you get when you're a kid, even though I do get the other extreme, like the excitement and the joy and stuff like that, I just feel like in general, the negative, if I get 5 positive messages and 1 negative message, like that 1 negative message, even though it's just one time, can just overshadow everything. And it's the thing that sticks with me. And it's the thing that kind of I'm feeling like all the time. Whereas when I feel joy, it seems like a little shorter lived in a way than the rejection. The rejection for me can go on for quite some time. And there's different.
Do you think that's reflective of society's management and understanding and lack of acceptance of having ADHD though? So the reason that I say that is obviously let's take those 20,000 negative messages, for example. Naturally, almost unavoidably, if you have ADHD, and especially if you're diagnosed later in life, you have a lot of trauma, right? I'm sure we can all agree on that, right? And a lot of that trauma is based on criticism and rejection, right? A lot of, you could do so well if you would just X thing that we can't do and we don't know why. Or if you could just focus or stop talking so much or whatever. And the classic not reaching potential, right? So it's really such a good topic to talk about because could it even be, and this is just, I'm spitballing really, but could it even be the case that the reason that RSD is the thing that as ADHDers we all really resonate with and relate to and do feel the strongest is quite simply the fact that we're trying to navigate a society that operates in a way that doesn't work for us.
Yeah, it could be, definitely. I think there's a whole kind of pattern there with not fitting into something which society deems as normal, like even in the workplace or relationships or everyday life. And yeah, I think so. It's maybe there's a slightly different accepted version of that in society that we don't quite fit there.
Yeah, and I think that's sad. I think that's so sad. I think that the fact that we have this whole community, and myself included, this whole community who really deeply see ourselves in RSD and really connect to it and really resonate with it and, for lack of a better word, really feel it when we talk about it and we hear about it, is a lot to do with external factors beyond the internal response. And I think that's heartbreaking. And I think it says a lot about a lot of changes that would really be
Have
beneficial.
you guys ever had... Sorry, I just interrupted you a bit.
No, okay, let's just make a rule. There's no apologies for interrupting.
Yeah, true. We've got to stop saying sorry for interrupting. But have you guys ever had... So you know how before I was talking about this longer term sort of feeling of rejection, but I also have these periods where I get like a very intense moment where it's almost like just my brain's having a moment and I know it. It's like a bit of a storm up there and I'm feeling intense rejection, but I know that it's not logical. And I'm like, okay, I know I'm in this episode where I'm feeling so rejected and I'm saying all these things. And it's almost like I can feel myself like I'm saying these things to somebody else, but I know that's not what's happening, but I can't help myself. I'm like, the emotions have just stirred up so much and I'm feeling so rejected. And I'm talking about this could be a 10, 15-minute thing where I'm just like, I'm in it. And I'm like, I know I shouldn't be saying these things, but I'm feeling this way. And I just go off on one. And then afterwards, I'm like, oh, I don't know why I said that because I know it's not that level of rejection, but I just felt it so intensely. I couldn't help it. And I just went off and I said some stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say earlier, like for me, similar to what you're saying right there, I feel the difference, I don't know what you call it, but like an episode or whatever where the RSD really hits. I feel it's almost like time stops and I'm just that deep in the chest feeling. And a lot of times like it's quick. Once I get past it, then I can look back and be like, oh, I didn't even understand the situation. I clearly misinterpreted what that person was saying. But now I've got to clean up the mess because how I responded blew everything out of proportion. And then maybe both of us said things back and forth or whatever. It becomes this huge thing. But the revelation for me finding out about RSD is like sometime after that, like I had watched a video on it and my wife had watched it as well. So then we both became aware that, oh, rejection sensitive dysphoria is this thing. And then sometime later, I had an episode where my wife said something and it felt like that deep betrayal. And I was ready to, like, the instinct within me felt justified to be really upset and to like probably respond in kind. And then we're yelling at each other. That's maybe what would have happened in the past. But I recognized it because we had just watched that video. I recognized it in the moment and then basically through gritted teeth was able to say, I think this is the RSD. Can we take a break? I don't want to continue right now because I'm probably going to say a bunch of stuff that it's just like you were saying is like this whole, it almost becomes like an out of body experience where it's just like all this stuff's happening and coming out of me. And at the same time, but I also am like, what's going on here? But because I was able to say that, we took a break. And then I was able to go through it logically. Okay, this is a conversation with my wife. We've been married for this long. Does it make sense to me logically that she would betray me the way that it felt like I was being betrayed in that moment? And with that logical examination, I was like, no, that doesn't make any sense. And so if that doesn't make sense, then what else could be going on? And it was like, that's the emotional dysregulation. I misheard it. And then it was like my brain's rewired the shortcut to feel the complete rejection. So it was like, yeah, I saw like enough context clues that my brain was like, oh, this is that rejection. Let's jump all the way to the finish line and then get really big and mad because that's what it feels like we should be in that moment. And I just feel stuck there without being able to label it and try to pause them. Just put the brakes on for a second and try to step back and examine if it is justified the way you feel in that moment.
Yeah.
I think you just gave me a thought on that, Jessie, because sitting here listening to you speaking about that, and especially in the context of relationships, I also think on the flip side, it's fascinating to me that the three of us, from a professional perspective, do work wherein we constantly face rejection. All of us, all three. Like, we have literally committed our lives to daily, rejection and criticism. And doesn't that interest you? Because I think for me especially, I'll tell you that maybe early on as an entrepreneur, rejection was difficult for me, but now it doesn't bother me at all in terms of from a professional perspective. In relationships though, like you're talking there, I'm like it's like a whole nother response, because and it's interesting because you would think it would balance, right? Obviously we care deeply about our relationships, but it's not like we just have jobs. I care very deeply about what I do for work, and I know that both of you two feel the same about that, right? So I wonder what the disconnect is in that level of response for us in opting, not only being in, a career path where rejection is like so ridiculously prominent, but choosing it. We choose to do that like on a daily basis. We're like, hate rejection, can't wait to see if I face any today. But it feels worse, you know what I mean? But like in relationships, it's even worse. It's interesting to me. I wonder where that difference stems from.
I definitely have experienced, I definitely agree with what you said. So like with being an entrepreneur, a lot of the things that you do just don't work, and something not working is a form of rejection. Oh, I tried to do this thing and it didn't work. Or you get some feedback, someone goes, oh, I give your app 2 stars. And that is a form of bad review, and that's a form of rejection. And it's not that I don't feel that. I do feel that, but it's not the same level of intensity. So there is a difference between my work stuff and my personal stuff in terms of how I process that and feel it. And I'm not sure if it's because with work stuff, I think, oh, yeah, I'm just learning. It's learning. Okay, someone gave me some feedback and it wasn't great, but maybe I can do something with that feedback. But if it's personal, I don't feel it's learning. I just feel like someone stabbed me in the chest.
But maybe some of the ways to manage that is transferring that awareness of that mindset, because you just hit the nail on the head with that. You're like, oh, like when it's at work or whatever, I'm just learning. And I think that's where it comes down to in relationships, especially having a partner who supports you in that learning. And by the sounds of it, Jessie, that's how you've gone about managing it. And it sounds like you definitely have that, and I have that too, and I'm very blessed with that. But I think you're right. It's about giving yourself the space to learn how to best manage that rejection so that it doesn't project, because I think that's the issue, right? Like we've got this sort of explosion of response inside of us, and then we've got no impulse control. So we're like, let me give you all of everything that's going on for me now.
Totally. It's like you're
for sure.
It's like we're strapped to the rocket and it takes off, and we have to consciously choose to be like, I got to get off this rocket, because otherwise, whatever direction it was aimed when it fired off within me, that's where I'm going, and I'm going there 1,000 miles per hour. And it's not until you become aware, like giving it that label of RSD or emotional dysregulation or whatever it is, to be able to identify when, the rocket took off. Is this what I actually want to be doing right now? Because if I don't think about if it's what I want to be doing, that's what I'm doing. I'm strapped to it and I'm going in that direction full speed. It's happening. And I think that was the awareness of with ADHD and kind of all the different things that come with it, is being able to recognize. You hear people say, oh, why do you need an ADHD diagnosis? It's just a label. And it's, those labels are really powerful. Like being able to give it a name makes it so much easier to be able to recognize it when you know what you're looking for, because otherwise you're just lost. And
also it takes away that, I think that's such a good point. And it also takes away that loneliness. If you've spent your whole life being like, I am so different to everyone around me and I have no idea why, and is it me? And then obviously to take that a step further, the massive resulting coexisting mental health struggles that people with ADHD experience from that. ADHD is lonely. Undiagnosed ADHD is isolating. And even going from isolating to lonely is a great step, but taking that step further of, wow, it's not just me. There's people like me. They exist. I can talk to them. I can connect with them. You can't do that. I'm sure this happens with you as well, but I get comments from people that are like, oh, I'm not sure if I have ADHD. So I'm not really sure if I can give my opinion. And I'm like, and every time I see that comment, I'm like, imagine if that person does have ADHD, which, let's face it, if they're going through my content, they probably do, and they just don't know it yet. Right. But let's just say they do. If they don't get that label, they don't feel qualified, which is a stupid word, but it's true, to connect with those people that have that same experience. It's so important to me. I feel so passionately about that. Like, when it's like, why do you need a label? I'm like, only people who say, why do you need a label, don't need a label. And that's just all of it. I'm like, well, clearly you don't need one. I don't know what's happening.
Or they already found their other label, and so they think everything's good. They don't realize that's what it is for them.
Exactly. It's like, because it's like an unseen, or it's not as visible, it's like an invisible disability. People think you don't need the label, but if you have diabetes, you're not going to go, you're going to say, I've got diabetes. You're not going to say, oh, I've got some like blood thing where I can't regulate my sugar or whatever. You're not going to just talk around it, or it's helpful to know you have diabetes. Like, you have ADHD. And a lot of people write to me and say, oh, I just got newly diagnosed. What do you recommend? What can I do? And I'm like, the best thing for me was like, go out there and find other people and friends who have ADHD. Go on social media and just search for ADHD on X or Instagram, and just start commenting on people's posts and treat it like you're a friend. Like, just relate to people, and you will make friends and find a community. And that has been one of the biggest game changers for me, is just like finding other people. It's just so crazy to talk to other people. And when you talk to them, they're just nodding, like you guys are nodding now. It's so easy to go, oh yeah, I just feel like completely normal when I talk to other people with ADHD, in a way that, like, I can just say something and I know the other person will be like, oh yeah, I get you. Yeah. It's so validating.
Yeah. I forget that there's people who exist who don't have ADHD now, because like my whole world is people with ADHD. And I went to the dentist recently, and they were like, have you like been flossing? And I was like, once a day. I was like, and I was so proud. I was like, once, is everyone listening? Daily. And they were like, oh, you really should be doing that twice a day. And I was like, oh. I don't think you heard me. I was like, every day I've done this. And I was like, oh yeah, I forget. Because if I told that to you guys, I know instantly you were like, once a day.
Amazing.
Well, even brushed
That's
your
what
teeth.
I thought the dentist was going to say. The dentist was disappointed. And I was just like, oh yeah, because my whole time is spent with people with ADHD. And as a result, and it's so important. My self-worth so much higher from having a community of people that I relate to. And that's just basic human psychology, right? It's connection, understanding, and a space to be safe and to be vulnerable. And that lacks in the world in general. But as I said, it's so amplified for ADHD.
So good. I was saying to some friends in an ADHD Slack group, I had a massive win because I washed my bed sheets and I hung them out to dry, and I also put them back on my bed the same day. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I shared that, and everyone in the group was like, win, like amazing. That's so great. And if I told that same story to my non-ADHD friends, they'll be like, what's wrong with you? How come you haven't done your laundry? Like, why can't you do your laundry? How come I can't believe you haven't washed your sheets in X amount of days? And I'm like, you don't understand how difficult that is for me. And there's this level of shame for that other group, which I just don't even hesitate to tell my ADHD friends. I'm like, they'll totally get it. And I feel so good when someone goes, yeah, good job, you did that. And there's no judgment. It's so different. But yes.
It's remarkable.
Yeah, and that good job or whatever, Ned Hallowell calls it, what is it? Recognition responsive euphoria, I think it is, which is basically his version of the opposite of RSD, which is basically the idea of how impactful positive feedback can be for people with ADHD. Like you tell me I'm doing a good job, then I am going to do amazing for you next time. I'm so motivated by that positive reinforcement. And it's funny you telling the story about sharing that win. I talk about that in my book because a buddy and I, we didn't know we had ADHD. This is years ago. We both had ADHD, but we didn't know it at the time. But we were both struggling in our marriages just with doing chores. It was just like, it's really hard for me to get motivated to do the dishes, even though I know that's my responsibility. I'm an adult. It shouldn't be that hard, blah, 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 whatever. Yeah. And I know how my wife loves it when I do that. Like, it's very positive for a relationship, all those things. But it's the reality is it's a struggle for me to do. And so my buddy and I that were talking about this, we basically just started texting each other every time we did the dishes or did some household chore, just so that the other person could say, amazing, you're so awesome, good job, dude, this is really going to help your relationship, stuff like that. Like we didn't want to tell our wives because it feels silly to be like, hey wife, pat me on the back for this one chore that I did, but we knew that each other would get it. And that I think is something you can get with having those like ADHD friends that get it. So I
think that's awesome. I think that's fantastic advice. I literally want you to say it again for everyone who accidentally did that thing where they were listening and were like, oh wait, what did he say? So everyone's going to rewind now because I'm going to be like, that
on your podcast player, hit minus 30.
Yeah, because that was really good advice. And I absolutely love that. And I think it's true. And I think that part of what we talked about before we were going to talk about this was talking about relationships. And sex in general is a struggle for ADHDers in relationships because of the distraction and the racing thoughts and everything going on and this and that and that. A couple of friends of mine who also have ADHD, what we realized is if you take that positive reinforcement, you're going to like this, and you transfer that into the bedroom, you get a really focused ADHD. Honestly, it's the same logic. It's a case of just wow, like you're doing a really great job, and everyone loves it anyway, right? In a sexual situation. But for ADHDers, we're like, oh, I am doing a great. This is great news. I'm so focused, right? I'm just saying. I just want to share. I want to share life hacks, and that is a life hack for sexual intercourse with ADHD.
Having a healthy sexual relationship,
which is important, right? Sex isn't a taboo subject. We're all adults here.
I think the point there, though, is that it really touches every aspect of your life. Like these same kind of concepts, they can be applied for every aspect, whether it's work, relationship, sex, whatever you're doing, it's touching that in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the show. That was a really great conversation. And it's just so nice to be able to talk to other people who have experienced this as well. So, Ari, if people want to catch up with you online, like where can they find you? Where can they follow you?
Yeah, just definitely Instagram. We're going to do that annoying thing where I didn't realize the perils of my Instagram name until I had to start saying it out loud because it's like 1,000 syllables. So that's irritating, but it's _ADHD _entrepreneur, which I think is like a sentence, you know what I mean? But yeah, so the ADHD Entrepreneur was taken. But to be honest, if you just search the ADHD Entrepreneur, it should come up anyway. And I'm actually about to start moving on to YouTube and onto kind of LinkedIn and Facebook and TikTok as well. So if you're feeling like you want to follow platforms that have no content on them, be my guest, but they will have content on them at some point soon. And yeah, that's pretty much the best place to find me.
Amazing. And Jessie, where can people find you?
Yeah, first I'll say like Ari does lots of awesome content for ADHDers that are entrepreneurs, which is probably all of you in some respects. So definitely check out that stuff. You can follow me online. I'm ADHD Jessie, which is nice and short, which is great.
No underscore, just ADHD.
No underscore, just ADHD Jessie. And that's on,
that's nice.
I don't know, all the platforms like Instagram, Threads, X, whatever. And then my book can be found, Extra Focus. You can find that wherever books are sold. How about you, Marie?
Awesome. So you can find me at 3 Hour Coffee on Twitter. So that's spelled out. I guess it's not a great name either. It's spelled out, the words 3 Hour and then coffee. Or you can check out Llama Life. Llama Life is on the web, but it's also in the app stores, iOS and Android.
I'm going to 100% vouch for Llama Life real quickly as somebody who is representing the entrepreneur community over here for ADHDers. I absolutely love it. And Marie didn't pay me to say that, although I'm hoping she will after. No, I joke. No, I don't want that to take away from it. That I think you've built such a truly incredible platform there, and I will endorse it until the cows come home.
Yay.
Or the llamas.
Or the llamas.
That's so nice to hear. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's my validating thing for today. That made me feel really good. Thank you.
Yeah, there's your positive feedback.
There's my positive feedback. Amazing. Yeah, thank you. Thanks again for being on the show. And yeah, we'll see everybody on the next episode.